The cycle of sexual addiction. Here's how it goes. Okay, it all goes back to the brain. So, what happens in the brain is that when your partner is feeling anxious, and unfortunately, he's trained his brain like a puppy over many years to go through this cycle, but it's neurally driven and it's neurochemically driven, is what I want you to know. But there's a feeling of anxiousness, which is a trigger. So he's triggered. He feels anxious about something. It can be money, it can be work, it can be you. Unfortunately, a lot of people will say, and it's not your fault, so I want you to know that, but a lot of partners, both sides, will say the most stressful thing in my life right now is my partner. But it's actually not your partner. For the person who has the addiction, it's actually not you. It's the fact that you're calling out the addiction. So when you're there going, dude, we need to get rid of this addiction, and your partner's going, I don't know what you're talking about, but you're actually talking to the hijacker, then that's so confusing for everybody. But what I want you to know is that he's actually triggered, and the minute that your partner is triggered, he gets a dopamine drip. The drip starts to go into his brain, and his brain goes, I feel anxious. The way that I deal with anxiety is I watch porn or I act out sexually. So now your partner's triggered and his brain's already started to move him towards the idea of watching pornography. We know from the science, the minute the dopamine drips, that it's very difficult to turn off because it will move your partner towards the flood. And that's going to be part of his work, and I will share that with you in a lesson. But he's triggered, feels anxious, needs to move towards mood regulation, pornography, masturbation, sexual acting out. So that moves him towards it. And we know that there's a routine and a ritual for many people. And when they enter into the routine and the ritual, their brain starts the dopamine flowing. And for many people, this part of the cycle is actually what they like the most. In the getting ready, it feels really good to the brain because they know they're moving towards the dopamine hit and the flood. Now, remember earlier in an earlier lesson when I told you about the dopamine at first, and I told you it's actually more complicated than your partner. When after he's acted out, there's a lot of dopamine in his system, and then before he's acted out, he needs dopamine. This is the caveat. This is the part where it gets tricky. This part's called overly bright, and this is something for you to look for because you know that the hijacker's moving in. And of course, communication becomes important, but your partner's triggered and the dopamine starts flowing. So for your partner, many men have a cycle. So what unfortunately happens, which creates anxious attachment, is when you go to visit your mother every Friday afternoon, your partner watches porn during that time frame. So on Wednesday, your partner's brain already knows 2 more days, my friend, and we get the dopamine flood. So your partner might be a nightmare on Monday and Tuesday, acting anxious and angry and irritable and, all kinds of crazy. And I know that's probably not a kosher word, but it feels that way when you're in it. But you feeling up and down and, yelling and just not a happy camper. But then on Wednesday, something shifted. And you've been with him the whole time. So you're like, how could he have shifted? And we've been together. What shifted is he knows he's going to watch porn in 2 days. He's already in the ritual and the routine of getting ready for it. Dopamine's starting to flow and he's feeling better. So this is the pre-dopamine flood, the flowing, overly bright part of the cycle. So when he's triggered, it's because he felt anxious and he's low in dopamine. That's the top of the cycle. Now he's starting to move through it, and in the ritual, he's starting to get some flow going and he's feeling better already. Then on Friday afternoon, you go to your mother's and he acts out and he watches porn for 3 hours, and he's escalating between lower levels to higher levels, and he's really getting the dopamine flowing. And so then in this field, they call it PMO, porn, masturbation, and orgasm. So if in that session, he culminates that session with an orgasm, there's porn, masturbation, and an orgasm, then the cycle completes. What happens for many people is they don't complete it. They won't have an orgasm because they've gotten their brain in this mode and they're creating the bubble. And as a pornography or a sex addiction problem escalates, that bubble becomes more common. So they'll consume but not culminate so that they can build this bubble. And so then they stay in it. So then they don't reach orgasm on Friday because you're going out on Sunday again and they're going to watch it again. And now, unfortunately, so many men just have phones in their pocket and they're watching porn all the time on the couch next to you. If that's your experience, you're not alone. Or out to dinner, they run to the bathroom and watch porn in the bathroom. But the reason they're doing it is because their brain has been hijacked and they're always going back for the dopamine hit, which is very sad for them. And that's where my compassion comes from, because to be in a place where you have to constantly go back and consume some content to take the edge off the anxiety you've accidentally created in your life that's founded in trauma, that's a sad place to be. Okay, but so let's just say in the PMO cycle right now, in this cycle of addiction, if it culminates in orgasm on Friday, what happens is the flood of dopamine hits their brain and they're numbed out. And that is the goal. So then after that, their brain will be in a heightened state of dopamine for a little while. Unfortunately, it's usually only a day or two at the very max. And I can see it in people's brains when they do brain training and they're in my program. I see it in their brains all the time. So that high level of dopamine is up here. That's the A effect. But then after that, there's a B effect. So not only does the dopamine go away, it goes lower. And that lower level of dopamine triggers them again because it creates anxiety. Lower dopamine, higher cortisol, the stress neurotransmitter, and it begins to move them back into that cycle quickly. So at the beginning of an addiction, the cycle can be far apart, but the more they engage in the cycle, it tightens up. And so, like I talked about too with the bubble, what will happen is many men will stay in that bubble all the time. That's when behaviors get very strange. If you see really strange behaviors like anger and yelling and acting out and tons of sexual comments, that's because their brain's just being lingered in this dopamine state without wrapping it up. Very dangerous. It's called edging, and it's a dangerous place for your partner to keep his brain, because going back to what I taught you about brain functioning, it is frying out the receptors as he lingers. It's deactivating the frontal lobe in the lingering. It feels good to him in the moment, but it's creating a world of damage and hurt for him in the long run. That's why I'm here. So what I want you to know is that everybody has a cycle. Your partner indeed has a cycle. It's either one where he's triggered, he starts to get the flow going, he's feeling better about it, he gets the major hit in a session, then he crashes after. I will tell you one more thing I didn't tell you yet, is in the crash after is the change point. That's when shame sets in and they feel really bad about doing it. And actually it's guilt and shame. Guilt is, I've done something I don't want to. Shame is, I'm a bad person. So when they feel guilty, like, I don't want to be doing this, that's when people call me. That's the moment where we can really capitalize on getting him into a program and getting him to work a program. And that's why I feel so passionate about helping men at the change point. So I'm there for them, because what happens is at this change point, after the numbing's worn off, but before the low of dopamine and the high of cortisol sets in and makes them anxious and irritable again, that's where they can change. And so many guys will schedule consultations with us, and then they'll go, I don't even know why I did this. And I'll be like, I know why you did, my friend, because you were in the change point. But now you've moved back through the cycle and you're back up at the top, or you're back in somewhere else. The change point is where he feels bad, or if you catch him in that point, that's when he's going to be reasonable to talk with. So that's the con. It goes back to the con. You will learn to know where your partner is in this cycle over time by his behaviors. That's why we say believe behaviors. If he's unreasonable, he's caught in this cycle somewhere. If he's reasonable and empathetic, he's healing from this cycle, and that dopamine pendulum is slowing down and he's moving back to the middle of calm focus in his brain. Okay, that's how the cycle works. Meet me in the next lesson for the stages of recovery for men who have betrayed. I'm going to share it with you there. Okay, thanks.